Tonight on Newshour, the escalating trade dispute between India and the United States moves into sharper focus as Washington confirms tariffs of up to 50% on a broad range of Indian goods. Well, the White House says the decision follows New Delhi's continued purchasing of Russian oil, a policy US officials argue undermines existing sanctions. The measures are set to affect more than half of India's merchandise exports to the US, covering sectors such as clothing, jewellery, machinery and agricultural produce. Industry leaders, they're warning of significant supply chain disruption, with the electronics sector estimating potential losses of up to $30 billion if restrictions remain in place. In Kerala, state officials fear major hits to cashew, seafood and rice exports. They're calling for urgent diversification of markets. Manufacturers, they're describing the new duties as equivalent to an embargo, with some US buyers already seeking alternative suppliers. And the fallout is not limited to trade. New Delhi has paused several major US defense procurement plans, raising questions over long-term strategic cooperation. Well, first, let's take a look at how the story unfolded.
India has sharply criticised US President Donald Trump's tariff escalation, calling it unjustified and unreasonable. The remarks come after Washington moved ahead with new duties that took effect this month, doubling the total tariff rate on many Indian goods to 50%. An initial 25% tariff came into force on August 7th under an executive order signed on July 31st. A second 25% penalty tied to India's purchases of Russian oil followed later in August. The White House says the measures target what it claims is New Delhi's resale of Russian crude for profit, an accusation India rejects. India is not only buying massive amounts of Russian oil, they are then, for much of the oil purchased, selling it on the open market for big profits. Trump posted on Truth Social. India's Ministry of External Affairs insists the country's energy imports are aimed at ensuring predictable and affordable costs for domestic consumers. It also noted that the US continues to import uranium hexafluoride, palladium, fertilizers, and chemicals from Russia. Like any major economy, India will take all necessary measures to safeguard its national interests and economic security, the ministry stated. US data shows the goods trade deficit with India reached $45.8 billion in 2024, up nearly 6% from the previous year.
US brands are also coming under fire in India, with growing calls for a boycott. Let's take a closer look at what's fueling this backlash and how it could affect some of America's biggest names in the market.
From McDonald's and Coca-Cola to Apple and Amazon, giant US brands are facing calls for a boycott in India. It's a protest against Trump's 50% tariffs on Indian goods, with business executives and Prime Minister Narendra Modi's supporters stoking anti-American sentiment. India's a key growth market for American companies, with increasingly affluent consumers often associating international brands with moving up in life. The world's most populous nation, for example, has more Domino's restaurants than any other brand. Drinks like Pepsi and Coca-Cola often dominate store shelves too. And people still queue up when an Apple store opens or a Starbucks cafe gives out discounts. Despite no immediate indication of sales being hit, there's a growing narrative to buy local instead. It's rattled exporters and damaged ties between New Delhi and Washington. And on Sunday, Modi made a special appeal for becoming self-reliant.
Over now to New Delhi, where our correspondent Ishan Garji has the latest. Ishan, what more can you tell us about the planned India-US trade talks later this month? And how is New Delhi preparing credit guarantees for small exporters who are hit by these tariffs?
Well, Guy, there's been a lot of speculation about whether India-US trade talks would fall through after President Donald Trump imposed 50% tariffs on India. But we've now got the first official confirmation from officials saying that the talks are indeed proceeding. The head of India's Parliamentary Committee on Foreign Affairs says that India does not want trade frictions to derail ties. Tensions between India and the US increased after President Donald Trump imposed 25% reciprocal tariffs on India and cranked it up further by imposing additional 25% duties. The US president has accused New Delhi of aiding the Kremlin by buying cheap oil from Moscow and says tariffs on India will help slow down Russia's economy. Now, these additional duties kick in on August 27th, 2 days after US officials are scheduled to arrive in New Delhi. So, through the sixth round of negotiations, New Delhi is hoping to crack a deal that offers it respite from the US tariffs. Officials say 55% of India's $87 billion worth of exports to the US are at risk, and some estimates suggest that these steep duties could cost the Indian economy just under 1% of its annual GDP. But the most vulnerable here are the labor-intensive industries that are facing sky-high tariffs of more than 50%. Textile and leather manufacturers as well as shrimp farmers are among them. Now, reports are saying that officials are now planning to provide credit guarantees for small businesses for a period of about 90 days. The government guarantees could cover about 10 to 15% of the total loan amount. The move is expected to help small exporters and also banks, which analysts believe could face loan defaults due to US tariffs cutting into small businesses' profits.
Okay, joining me now for analysis is Ajay Srivastav, founder of the New Delhi-based Global Trade Research Initiative. Ajay, great to see you. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's look at the short-term impact then of this. How significant do you think this economic impact is likely to be on India's key export sectors over the next coming months, in that sort of the next couple of quarters, that short-term period?
So to put things in perspective, exports account for 20% of India's GDP, and exports to the US, they account for 20% of India's total merchandise exports. So it's significant. Exports to US at $87 billion annually are significant. Of these, about 30% of the exports, they are tariff exempt. Remaining 70% will face tariffs ranging from 50% to 72%. And for example, labor-intensive goods, like I take the example of shirt. Now, the MFN tariff in US on shirt is 12%. 12% plus 50% will be 62%. Comparable tariff on our nearest competitor, say China, will be 30 plus 12, 42%. Vietnam will be just 20%. So Indian labor-intensive goods will mostly go out of the market, and I believe in the next 6 months there will be fall in exports to the US in these sectors by 60 to 70%, and after 6 months the fall will be even more rapid, and in some sectors it will go down at 90%.
And let's just look at the reasons behind this, if we can. I mean, you know, plenty of nation states buy Russian energy. This has been billed as a direct consequence of India's continued purchasing of Russian oil. Do you buy that? Or is there any legitimacy in that? Or do you think there are possibly other reasons behind what's happened?
So data says the full story. Mr. Trump doesn't believe in data, and the largest buyer of Russian oil is China. India is the number two buyer, but he will dare not accuse China of buying Russian oil because China has certain leverages over US, like they can stop the supplies of critical materials, which can stop US production in defense, electronics, semiconductors, automobile, and many other industries. So it's just the leverage China has that's working on the US. It's not about the fair trade or fair play. When he says that by buying oil from Russia, India is fueling Russia's efforts into Ukraine war, he forgets that China buys most oil. So Russia is just a pretense. He could as well use another pretense to punish India. And why he wants to punish India? I have a hypothesis. See, the trade war started with China, and in the last trade war, U.S. trade deficit increased by $760 billion, while China's global exports increased by $1 trillion. So clearly, US lost the trade war. This time also, China did not allow them to touch it. So he has to be shown as good, strong leader in his home voters. So India was made the fall guy in this. So basically, it's all to appease the United States voters that India was made the fall guy, and whatever terms were there, we could agree on almost everything in trade terms. But if you're talking about non-trade terms like don't buy military items from Russia, don't buy oil from Russia, you have so many barriers which we feel they are not the barriers; they are just restrictions on account of health and cultural sensitivities. Then I think US is very clear that that it wants to punish India for certain reasons to be looking good in its domestic constituency, and India is the fall guy.
And there is within India a major push taking place around manufacturing. There is the Made in India campaign. Now, I'm sure you don't expect this to completely derail that initiative, but do you expect that initiative to have to make adjustments due to these tariffs?
I think these tariffs are a signal that India needs to work deeply on its internal renewal, deep, deepening its manufacturing, taking fundamental reforms to cut the cost of making things, cost of doing business, ease of doing business, and many more such reforms, which we were doing at a slow pace. But now this US provides a sense of urgency for the renewal. So I think it may prove to be good in the long term.
And what is the strategic shift that you expect India to make in response to this? Is it going to be looking for alternative export markets, or is it going to try and negotiate with the US? How do you expect it to adapt?
So three, four scenarios they are emerging. One is, say, the status quo continues and India makes efforts to export more to other markets by signing free trade agreements and reinforcing its product profile. Second, Mr. Trump in the past 4 days has talked twice on Truth Social that US is doing very fine in terms of high tariffs being charged on all other countries, but US only danger is from the US courts, which should not throw down the tariff. The US Court of International Trade has already found that tariffs lacks the legal basis. So on very weak legal basis, the higher federal court has only stayed. It has not. It has not thrown away the judgment of the lower court. So who knows that in the next few weeks some decision may come which says that tariffs are totally illegal, and then we may go to the prior to April 2 situation, that is only MFN normal tariffs will prevail. Another situation, I mean, three, four such scenarios are there.
I mean, there are quite a lot of consumers in India, to say the least, who are regular customers of companies like Coca-Cola, Apple, many other large US brands. Do you expect negotiations to take place in order that those brands receive tariff relief? Because obviously they're very, very important markets for those brands, huge numbers of potential customers.
So these brands they make locally in India. There is no threat to them. They don't face any tariffs anywhere, neither within the country nor at the US borders. They don't export the things back to the US. I mean, Coca-Cola I'm talking about. Apple, of course, exports to US. Now, Apple makes 85% of its iPhones in China, just 15%, 14, 13, 14% in India. So Apple, Mr. Trump may be negotiating with Apple separately about shifting the business in US. But we have the example of Motorola, which in 2013-14 tried to assemble smartphones in US and it failed miserably. So it's not easy for Apple to shift the final assembly in US.
Okay, let's shift from consumer brands that we all know to defense contracts, defence cooperation, another very important part of bilateral relations between Washington and New Delhi. There have been suggestions that a recent purchase of military equipment that had been due has now been put on hold. Can you talk to us about that and what you foresee as future implications for those defence relations?
I think it's a quick action, something which the purchases which were going on, we just delayed the purchases for some time. But long term, there is no change in policy. Russia remains a critical defense supplier for India, a strategic partner. Russia always stood with India during its leanest time, say war against Pakistan. All the time, Russia was with India. So India will continue Russia as the top partner in defense supplies. The rest of the world, including US or France, India keeps buying based on the quality of the equipment.
The US is such an important country that whether it's in currency or in geopolitics or in business, where it leads, many like to follow. Are you concerned at all that other countries may follow the example of the US and take a tough line on trade with India?
US-based tariffs for the world is no more zero. It used to be zero. Now it's about 15%. So 15 is the new zero for whole of the world. Europe is closing soon. From January 1 next year, it will be applying that carbon tax through carbon border adjustment mechanism. It will be starting from January 1. It will be taxing. So most of the developed world has turned protectionist, and they will be putting all type of barriers, tariff and other barriers on goods from all over, especially from the developing countries. So I don't see anyone targeting specifically India on this account.
And finally, I'd just like to get your thoughts on bilateral relations going forward. I mean, you mentioned that this is a very transactional relationship. Nevertheless, we have seen in the past some genuine warmth, mutual respect between Mr. Modi and Mr. Trump. What is your analysis of how bilateral relations are likely to develop over the next 6-12 months?
I think it's very short term or small comma, not a full stop, and things should resume very soon to the normal level or even better level because both the countries have so much stake in each other's progress.
RJ, we thank you very much indeed for joining us and for that analysis. Thank you very much indeed for being on Newshour.
Thanks.
That brings us to the end of this edition of Newshour. India and the United States then remain on course for trade talks later this month, even as new tariffs cast a long shadow over key sectors. We'll continue to follow the negotiations and their global impact. That's all for this edition of the show. From all of us here at A News, thanks for being with us.